Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. It's great to see so many of you online today. So firstly, thanks very much for taking some time out of your day to join me as we explore how to identify payroll non-compliance in your organization. My name is Joel Smith. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Affinity Payroll, which means I'm responsible for our go-to-market and business growth strategies. I've got a long history of working in technology leadership roles and have extensive experience working in payroll, HRIS, and financial services technology businesses in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. So just a couple of quick housekeeping items to start. We're planning on running for about 25 minutes or so today, and we're going to send through a short survey at the very end to get your views. So please stay online to fill that out if you can. And whilst we normally run a Q&A session at the end of these events, there are a lot of you on the webinar today. So to ensure we don't go over time, if you do have any burning questions, please just drop them into the chat function, and we're going to contact you after the webinar this time. Okay, so time to get stuck into how to spot payroll non-compliance in your organization, and of course, what you can do about it. Here's a quick look at what I'll be covering in this session. Firstly, I'm going to take you through some of the red flags that signal non-compliance in your organization, and then I'll explain how to improve compliance by reducing manual administration, staying up to date with legislative changes, investing in payroll technology, and leveraging payroll expertise. Now, in-house payroll can be complicated to get right, especially for smaller payroll teams that are constantly challenged to do more with less. And to make matters worse, most businesses don't conclusively know whether they have a payroll problem or not. And if they do, often that's not being escalated to the right people. It's really important for finance and HR leaders to get more involved in the key areas of payroll that have the potential to cause problems, including skills gaps, accreditation, and changes in legislation. It's also important to understand your internal processes, which might highlight room for improvement and might also lead to necessary adjustments to future-proof your payroll function. A 2021 survey that was done by Global Upside of payroll professionals asked respondents to highlight their most significant payroll challenges. Unsurprisingly, but somewhat worryingly, most said compliance was still their top challenge. And look, payroll compliance was already a complicated area before the COVID-19 pandemic struck. Just mentioning the Holidays Act to a payroll officer in New Zealand will cause probably a few nervous tics and the proliferation of some more grey hair. Many companies have discovered that regulatory changes are often written in such a way that leaves them frustratingly open to individual interpretation as those changes are applied to individual organisations. And it would be remiss of me not to mention that Australia and New Zealand, in our opinion, two of the most complex payroll environments in the world, and yet there are many businesses that operate in both, and so that's an even bigger challenge. So what are some of the common red flags that signal payroll non-compliance for Australian and New Zealand businesses? And just to be clear, when we're talking about non-compliance, we're referring to what occurs when an organisation fails to follow applicable laws and regulations regarding employee compensation, taxes, and deductions. So non-compliance can result in penalties, fines, and lawsuits. So in some cases, severe financial and legal consequences are there, not only for the organisation, but also in some states, directors are now personally liable for non-compliance as well. So we're talking about paying people properly. Not being aware of regulatory changes is one of the biggest payroll compliance issues, and it can be exhausting for businesses to comply with an ever-increasing wave of legislation, particularly when it comes to payroll. Now, legislation in Australia and New Zealand changes regularly, impacting payroll administration, records, tax liability, and superannuation. Failing to accurately pay entitlements owed to employees and making mistakes around employee classification and awards can result in financial penalties, reputational damage, and more seriously, even imprisonment for wage theft. Payroll changes don't just happen frequently. These changes often have a significant impact on both organizations and employees. Payroll teams need to be aware of regulations that impact sick leave, family leave, employee privacy, hiring and terminations, workplace health and safety, overtime bonuses, record keeping, and laws that also relate to anti-discrimination and anti-harassment. And one of the most obvious signs that you have a payroll problem is, fairly obviously, employee complaints about being paid incorrectly. And these complaints inevitably result in escalations to the payroll team, which inevitably result in additional time being spent resolving complaints and investigating issues. Once an employee has encountered a payroll issue, you risk losing their trust in the future, and undoubtedly they then will be questioning payroll every time there's a variance in their pay. They will also talk to their peers and create elevated awareness of any payroll issues. You'd be astonished at how quickly private employee WhatsApp groups spring into life to serve that purpose, and you really don't want that. So this sort of underpayment or overpayment of employment wages can be caused by misclassifying employees and will likely land employees in hot water. In Australia, breaching workplace obligations under the Fair Work Act can result in investigation and prosecution by the Fair Work Ombudsman and incur significant financial penalties and back payments. So if your workforce has diverse contract types and complex work patterns, classifying employees becomes even more of a challenge. And in such cases, this elevates the importance of checking and double checking that employee information is correct and current. Now, a fast-growing business with several contractors perhaps to help with the expansion can be particularly vulnerable to this issue of classifying employees correctly. So this is also why HR and payroll must be symbiotic, joined at the hip. If the payroll team isn't given the correct onboarding and employment lifecycle information about each employee, then their classification may be correct or become incorrect over time. Something else you should be keeping an eye on is how often your payroll team are running out-of-cycle pay runs for pay, commissions, and expenses. So if out-of-cycle pay runs are becoming more commonplace in your organization, you need to be asking why. Another really clear sign that your payroll is non-compliant is when you're missing tax filing deadlines and deposit dates. This is also a great way to get the attention of auditors. Even if the reason is relatively benign, tax authorities don't know that and could assume the worst, even prompting an investigation to figure out what's happening. Not hitting deadlines is also a signal to managers that something isn't quite right with the payroll system. Payroll rules are supposed to inform what you should do and when you should comply. So those are pretty clear signs that something problematic might be going on with your payroll. And I just want to add two more issues into the mix. The first one is manual or paper-based systems. If your payroll team insists on using paper or manual processes, for example, if you're seeing lots of Excel spreadsheets, you should consider this a red flag. You might be presented with a variety of reasons as to why this is a good idea, including, now this is the way we've always done it, or, we have to manage this element of the process outside of our current system for these reasons. But fundamentally, operating like this can be very problematic. Manual systems can overload payroll teams, and then the extra work creates more chances of human error. The flexibility of Excel spreadsheets can be one of its strengths, but for payroll purposes, it can be a major downfall. Frankly, it's really easy to break a spreadsheet, use a wrong version of a spreadsheet, and it's sometimes hard to identify those issues. With manual or paper-based systems, businesses can fall into the trap of regularly miscalculating overtime or attendance, which can then result in employees being paid incorrectly, which then ultimately can contribute to a sense of dissatisfaction in the workplace. In my experience, the fastest way to disengage a workforce is to pay them incorrectly. That's not a good thing to do. Another key issue that might not be quite so obvious is mixed messages coming from the top within an organization. And this happens quite a lot. A manager's under pressure from their superiors to get things done. And rather than dealing with that pressure by following process, they push it onto the payroll team by just asking them to fast track a new hire. Or actually, maybe the new hire has already started a week or so ago, and the pressure's on then to catch up. So the payroll team, maybe they gather the basic information that they need manually, assuming the rest is going to come later. But then a few months pass, everyone's caught up with other projects, and the employee details are only now entered into a payroll system and perhaps not validated, creating this domino effect of non-compliance and risk. Now, it might be hard to remember to follow process when the pressure's high, but managers should keep in mind that following the correct path of compliance from the very start, even if it takes a little longer, and frankly it shouldn't, it's going to save time and money later on. So these are some of the red flags that typically indicate there might be payroll non-compliance. And if some of those resonated with you, or if you're just curious to get under the hood of your payroll processes, then conducting an internal audit could be the first step to ensuring that there's nothing slipping through the cracks. Now, one of the first issues I mentioned was payroll staff who were not across legislative changes. Your payroll department must be aware of regulations that impact things like hiring and terminations, leave entitlements, overtime, bonuses, and changes to modern awards in Australia, just to name a few. So to get a handle on this at your organization, you need to ask yourself, how are your payroll team keeping up with those legislative changes? Do they understand how those changes need to be reflected within your organization? Are they attending seminars, training courses, or are they relying on secondhand information? Or even more of an issue, are they finding out about legislative changes after they've already commenced? I've already mentioned this, but it bears repeating. Non-compliance can result in hefty back payments, penalties, and even jail time. For example, Victoria's Wage Theft Act 2020 states that it's now a crime for an employer to deliberately and dishonestly underpay employees, withhold employee entitlements, and falsify employee records. There's similar legislation in place in other countries, including New Zealand. It just emphasizes how critical it is to understand these changes. Fulfilling the legislative obligations of payroll is critical for every business who employs people. And in reality, constantly changing and complex legislation can be confusing and difficult to interpret, and this can lead to potential misclassification of employees and problems achieving compliance. And part of the problem here is that less than 12% of payroll professionals in Australia, and I don't believe it's too different in New Zealand, hold any form of accreditation. And if we really think about that, it is a mind-blowing statistic. So let's put that into another context. If you imagine that only 12% of accountants managing your tax returns were accredited and qualified to do so, you'd be horrified, rightly so. So navigating payroll can seem daunting, but then having unaccredited employees dealing with complex payroll functions, that's a disaster waiting to happen. And then what happens if your payroll team underpays or overpays an employee? We don't hear so much in the newspaper headlines about overpayment situations, but trust me, that also happens. Are you confident that your payroll team will adequately handle these situations and put you in a position where you're avoiding legal action? Fair Work has taken the stance that simply not knowing isn't a valid excuse for being non-compliant. So it's vital that your payroll people have the appropriate training and pathways to stay up to date with changes. Aligning themselves with organisations such as the Australian Payroll Association and the New Zealand Payroll Practitioners Association is a really good place to start. Things are getting more difficult for businesses. With slow growth in payroll expertise, creating a widening skills gap and leaving a large number of unfilled seats in payroll departments. And for those who remain in the industry, continual education and training is critically important. It goes without saying that the payroll profession is dynamic and it's evolving. There's ever-changing technology, employment types, and legislation. And all these changes require payroll professionals who are always up to date, or the risk of that non-compliance, it inevitably creeps in. So if your existing team is not certified, that's a big red flag, especially with the amount of churn that we see in payroll teams today. So currently there are over 900 payroll jobs advertised just on Seek. So things are definitely not getting better for the payroll industry in terms of resourcing. At the very least, finance and HR leaders should conduct a skills gap analysis to identify any missing payroll skills and then develop a plan to fill those gaps. Seeking formal accreditation and attending payroll seminars can provide employees with really good, valuable insights that they can bring back to the workplace. However, not every business has the time or resources to do this. Instead, when the risk of getting payroll wrong feels overwhelming, businesses should look to managed payroll providers who offer accredited payroll experts who are equipped to meet those compliance needs. So partnering with an organization like us, like Affinity, means that you can leverage accredited payroll and compliance experts who have a deep understanding of the legislation. We often say payroll is a science, not an art, and payroll decisions should be made on the basis of data, deep knowledge, and 100% accuracy, not opinion. Having a team of accredited payroll specialists goes a long way towards improving employee engagement through accurate and on-time pay, better QA, and handling of new regulations, and understanding how to classify employees accurately. Knowing where to source reliable information and understand the impact of any changes coming through means tapping into the right networks. And while government websites and industry publications do provide great insights, translating that information into real-world changes to your systems, your policies, and your processes requires a great deal more discernment and effort, and then high-quality experienced people to own that. At Affinity, we live and breathe this stuff. We live and breathe compliance. We know that compliant payroll is accurate payroll. And we also know that this is an area where many organizations struggle. Now, when your business remains compliant, you can then avoid complex legal and regulatory penalties, fines, and focus on much higher value, higher return on investment activities. At the end of the day, very few businesses got into business to experience the joy of managing payroll. I mean, we did, but most don't. Another really important area you need to investigate within your organization is whether or not your payroll team is classifying your employees correctly, particularly in Australia. You need to understand if your team knows which award every employee is covered by and the classification that applies to each of the employment contracts that you have in place. Businesses must comply with the obligations required by employee classifications for essential things such as tax and superannuation. And failing to do this, I keep saying it, it's going to incur significant risk around penalties, back taxes, and back pay as well. And as the workforce embraces more varied contract types and work patterns, we're seeing this with the rise of flexible work and the gig workforce, that classification of employees becomes an even greater challenge. Consulting with advisors can help ensure that your organization follows all applicable laws and regulations on that topic of employee classification. Compliance experts and legal professionals can provide you with guidance as to how you correctly classify employees and independent contractors, as well as helping you navigate any legal issues that might arise. And many modern payroll systems have built-in tools to help you correctly do this. These tools can help you avoid misclassification and ensure that your payroll is compliant with all the applicable laws and regulations. Bottom line, your company needs to accurately report employee classifications. Simplifying the process by outsourcing your payroll to a specialist provider can help identify any current errors and inaccuracies that you might have, ensuring that employees are correctly classified moving forward. And speaking about focusing on core priorities, one of the best ways to do this and to free yourself up is through automation. More and more companies are choosing to implement automation in their payroll systems, and it's a big reason to update your payroll technology. Applying automation to payroll isn't just about removing the human element or speeding things up. It's about augmenting your most valuable assets, your employees. Payroll managers can spend hours each week performing manual tasks relating to data and reporting. That's time doing things that a machine could easily do. So automation helps increase everyone's productivity when staff no longer need to perform those mundane, repetitive tasks. An automated payroll system eliminates paper-based timesheets, physical pay slips, it speeds up processes, and it reduces payroll errors. And this is a key part of automation. It also makes payroll records far more accessible. An added benefit of fully paperless payroll processes is that businesses can cut their paper usage and go green. So it's going to support your ESG policies as well. Automation in payroll reduces that risk of human error, which is a common cause of non-compliance. For example, automated payroll software can calculate and withhold the correct taxes and deductions, ensuring that employees are paid accurately and in compliance with all applicable laws and regulations on time, every time. And it can drastically reduce the time it takes for payroll teams to finish the job, as well as the number of workers needed to do the task in the first place. Freeing people up from mundane tasks and allowing them to focus on higher value work that brings more money into the business is a key element behind automation. You may have heard of the productivity paradox as well. Automation with modern payroll technology solves that paradox too. This is the paradox where technology can actually at a certain point slow down productivity because people are working out and spending time switching between apps, learning how to use them. Automation plays a really important role here because those disparate systems can be integrated using APIs and data flows become streamlined as a result. So businesses that want to save on costs whilst accessing the latest payroll technology should consider outsourcing their payroll processes, particularly fully managed payroll services invest in state-of-the-art technology that's secure, accessible, and disaster-proof, ensuring that businesses operate smooth and efficient payroll functions. Legacy technology, it may have gotten the job done a couple of decades ago, but it likely isn't fit for purpose in today's world. If your last payroll implementation goes back a decade or two, I'd suggest it needs a serious look. The payroll environment has changed and become radically more complex in that time, and it's important that your tech is kept up to date. Outdated software increases risk, and it slows your response times, it reduces your productivity. Upgrading your payroll software is a secure investment. It's going to simplify your payroll process, and it reduces the reliance on key people. It eliminates duplication and it improves accuracy. The very latest payroll software, such as the software that we've released recently, prepares businesses for the future of payroll. It's providing real-time data, automated workflows, pay on demand, interactive pay slips, employee benefits, and mobile-friendly self-service functions. It really empowers employees and managers, and it removes the administrative load on payroll teams. Keeping accurate payroll records is essential for compliance with labor laws and regulations. Technology can help here, can help improve the record keeping by providing secure and centralized storage for your payroll data. And this helps ensure that all payroll records are kept up to date, accurate, and easily accessible when needed, which again reduces the risk of non-compliance due to incomplete or inaccurate records through the life cycle of an employee. Real-time and event-driven payroll technology is now allowing employers to track and monitor their payroll processes as they happen. This can help identify and correct issues really quickly, reducing the risk of non-compliance penalties and fines. And this type of innovative technology can provide valuable insights into payroll trends and patterns, helping you make more data-driven decisions to improve your processes and compliance outcomes. So look, that was quite a lot to take in today, but what I think is really important for you to take away from this sessions are some key questions that you need to ask of your organization so that you can start to identify some payroll non-compliance issues, or whether they exist or not. So ask yourself, how are you, or how is your payroll function staying up to date with regulatory changes? How many of your payroll staff are accredited currently? How often are you receiving employee complaints about incorrect payments? Are you classifying your employees correctly? How often do out-of-cycle pay runs happen? Are you consistently missing tax filing deadlines and deposit dates? Are you using any manual or paper-based systems? And are your line managers and payroll staff communicating with each other effectively? And another couple of questions I'll throw in there is, do you actually know the answers to these questions? And of course, how old is your current payroll implementation and systems? The answers to these questions will give you some insight. And that really gives you the basis of a very quick mini audit. But it is a great way for businesses to start investigating their internal payroll processes. So as we've gone through today, there are really four main key areas that you must have right to increase or maintain compliance. You have to ensure you're adequately training your payroll staff. You have to have implemented up-to-date and compliant payroll technology. And you have to have managers and payroll teams who are communicating effectively to mitigate any risks and errors. And the final point here is to engage an external expert agency to review your people, processes, and technology. Now, if anything that we've mentioned today is occurring now in your organization, then it's definitely time to engage an organization like Affinity to run a health check on your payroll environment. We can run that, we can review your payroll and workforce management functions and produce a risk analysis and heat map. And this then gives you a really clear view on what is and what isn't working and what you can do about it. If you'd like to speak to us about how Affinity's fully managed payroll solution and technology can help transform your business, you can contact us directly through lots of mechanisms, our website, through email. You can give us a call, you can connect to us on LinkedIn. We'd love to chat. Now we're going to release a short survey now because we're just slightly over time. We'd love your feedback to help us provide as much value as we can in future webinar series. So thanks again for your time today, and that concludes our webinar. We'll see you again next time.